Okay, well, when it comes to the Justice Department, they had a very busy week, actually. And so there were other surprise charges that dropped a couple days before the raid at Mar-a-Lago. And those came with an announcement from Attorney General Merrick Garland, who I guess gave the first statement I've ever liked in my life from this guy. So let's roll this clip real fast.
We allege that the defendants knew their actions in falsifying the affidavit could create a dangerous situation, and we allege these unlawful acts resulted in Ms. Taylor's death. The charges announced today also allege that the officers responsible for falsifying the affidavit that led to the search took steps to cover up their unlawful conduct after Ms. Taylor was killed. We allege that defendants Janes and Goodlett conspired to knowingly falsify an investigative document that was created after Ms. Taylor's death. We also allege that they conspired to mislead federal, state, and local authorities who were investigating the incident. For example, we allege that in May 2020, those two defendants met in a garage where they agreed to tell investigators a false story. This indictment separately alleges that defendant Meany lied to the FBI during its investigation of this matter.
So this is a big moment. It's been 2 years, I think just a little bit over 2 years, since Breonna Taylor was murdered in Louisville. And this was a very high-profile case. I followed it closely. I wrote pretty extensively about it because it was just indicative of so many issues I've seen behind the closed doors in the justice community that were kind of being brought to light. We knew that the warrant had been obtained in very fishy circumstances. We knew that there had been, at the very least, gross negligence. You had one officer in particular who just shot up the whole building like a drunken octopus. Like, he even shot into another person's apartment, just lunatic. You've had Second Amendment issues where her boyfriend, very rightfully, when somebody was breaking into his house in the middle of the night, shot back and tried to defend himself.
They didn't announce themselves as police.
Yeah, because it was a no-knock raid, and who wouldn't shoot back in those circumstances? They tried to charge him initially, even though that was a very lawful use of his Second Amendment rights. And then, of course, you ultimately had Breonna Taylor murdered, who was an innocent young woman who had never done anything that she allegedly was being looked at by police for. And as a whole, it was just a very, very sad story. So it kind of hit this fever pitch in the summer of 2020, which was while all the BLM riots and protests were going on. And then it sort of died because, sadly to say, we didn't expect there to be any repercussions, no matter how bad the behavior of police had been in these circumstances, because one, it's so excessively rare, and two, because they basically had tried to file charges at the state level against the one police officer who had fired around like a drunken octopus for wanton endangerment, and those failed. He was acquitted. So it's really hard to get, even when you do get them to bring charges against police, they can easily throw those kinds of cases. The DA might not work that hard. They might not gather that much evidence. They might not seek as aggressive of charges against them. On and on it goes. So either way, he was acquitted of those charges and nothing happened. So this was a really big announcement. I actually found myself kind of tearing up. And again, this isn't a conviction. This isn't justice yet. But just the fact that her family's getting some acknowledgement of wrongdoing in this case, especially when the scale of it was so vast, was emotional to me and surprising. What were your reactions?
Yeah, I was surprised because you don't usually see legal accountability. Honestly, the best you can hope for is that cops involved in these kind of abuses of power are fired, but even that doesn't often happen because of the police unions. In this case, though, it looks the charges against 4 officers involved in the March 13, 2020 raid include civil rights offenses, unlawful conspiracies, unconstitutional use of force, and obstruction. So, I mean, this is a big deal.
Yeah.
And they also are being held accountable for some of the people involved. So let's clarify this. In Breonna's case, the officers who fired the fatal shots were not involved in the warrant's creation and didn't know it was faulty, according to Merrick Garland, the Attorney General. However, several other officers apparently did know that the search warrant had used false, misleading, and out-of-date information, according to the indictment against them. So, I mean, that happens a lot, but it's very rare that we get people held accountable for it. And so I actually think that the Breonna Taylor case both in terms of high-profile accountability. You know, it's not there yet, but this is promising. And also, if you remember, this sparked a very real conversation about no-knock warrants, which is when the police obtain a special kind of warrant that they can barge into your house without knocking and then without declaring themselves as the police. And in this case, they say that they knocked, even though it was a no-knock. Who knows for sure? But they did not declare themselves as police. And so the thing about no-knock warrants that's so messed up is that somebody barges into your house in the middle of the night and doesn't announce themselves as the police, and you shoot at them. You've done nothing wrong in the minds of most Americans, yet you just are probably going to get killed by police or even face charges. And what happened here is that an innocent woman got caught in the crossfire. So the no-knock warrant thing, especially because they'll say, well, what if they have to take out a serial killer or something? And maybe there are very rare cases, but most of the time it's used in drug cases.
Yeah.
And their argument is they'll destroy evidence if we announce ourselves. And how much evidence are they going to destroy in 30 seconds? And also, why is human life less valuable than that? I mean, I think it's absurd. And so we actually saw a lot of movement to end no-knock warrants. I believe that the state of Kentucky, which has a Republican government, ended them in their state, and that's where this happened. So, you know, I'm hoping that this whole saga could be a positive impact for change. It won't bring her back to life, and it won't heal her family's wounds, but it would be something.
Yeah, it's like how much, if you actually have a meth lab, how much evidence are you going to destroy in the intervening moments between a knock and police announcing themselves? And that's because they often are not using this to go after the drug kingpins they want to convince you that they are. They're using it to go after somebody who's got marijuana in a shoebox. It's absolutely ridiculous. That's basically the case here. Breonna Taylor's ex-boyfriend, I do believe, was involved in drugs. I think he sold some drugs here and there. But how these officers went about this is they actually lied on the warrant. Okay, this is a really big deal. These officers actually lied on the warrant and said that she was receiving packages for her ex-boyfriend at her house. But investigators have now confirmed that Officer Janes, who's one of the main people charged under the new federal charges, never confirmed any such packages with the Postal Service. So he just made this up. There's no checks and balances for this. They literally can get away with this kind of thing, and people die because of it, right? And had it not been for the really bright spotlight on Breonna Taylor's case, it's likely that there would never have been repercussions for this whatsoever. These kinds of incidents happen all the time in this country. That's the kind of crazy thing about Breonna Taylor's case to me, is it's not an outlier. We regularly see stories of no-knock raids gone bad, and so hers, I think, just happened around the time where these things were starting to blow up and it got a lot of attention. But fortunately, we have seen Rand Paul, who's the Republican senator from her state of Kentucky. He's the only person who's brought federal legislation so far to try to address some of this. And I'm hoping that we see more actions taken at the federal level more broadly to ban this kind of behavior, because it's really gross. And we also need a lot more attention paid to how people go about getting warrants in the first place, as this case shows. So Officer Joshua Janes and Brett Hankinson, who is the drunken octopus, I'd like to brand him as that, and also current officers Kelly Goodlett and Sergeant Kyle Meany. Those are the four who've been charged. Louisville police are moving to try to fire Goodlett and Meany. They're still on the force. And they let's see, by they I mean Janes and Hankinson. They face maximum sentences of life in prison, while Goodlett is pleading to a lesser charge, but he did plead guilty. So we'll see what happens there. Federal charges are a lot more significant than state level charges. It just means they carry heftier sentences. They usually get a lot more resources once you get to the federal level. There's a lot more investigation and evidence gathering, and it just is a different, more weighty kind of charge. So I think the fact that the Justice Department and the Attorney General are not involved in this case will probably mean a good thing for her family.
These are criminal charges, but it's unlikely, right, because of qualified immunity, that they will be Breonna's family will be able to sue these officers and get any financial damages. Isn't that pretty unlikely given qualified immunity in the status quo?
It is. Her family actually did get civil damages a year or so ago from the city, but that's just paid by taxpayers, right? That's not the officers having to actually pay that. I don't think it's even the police department that necessarily pays it. It's like the city's insurance and things like that will step in and pay those kinds of settlements. So yeah, it's very unlikely you'd see these individuals held civilly responsible or liable for her death. Although it's not impossible. It would just, the way qualified immunity works is if you can basically show somebody has been found responsible for very similar circumstances in a prior case. Is there a legal precedent that backs it up? And then you can get around qualified immunity. But
every case is a little different, so that's hard to do.
It's a very, very small window. So, but either way, I'm fine with him going to jail. That suits me just fine. So we'll see what happens, but we'll definitely be following that very, very closely. So that's one in Merrick Garland's column. I have about 10 other tallies against him, but we'll see. Maybe he'll be hot one day. All right. Over the weekend, probably not.